ditch, haggis fáilte. Come in and warm your feet by the fire. You might take a cup of tea. I'll have one myself. Now, I'm going to tell you a story tonight about Red Hanrahan. Now, Red Hanrahan is a fictional character. He's not real. He's invented by the real poet, W.B. Yeats. Now, Yeats based Red Hanrahan on the real poet, Owen Red O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan lived between 1748 and 1784, and he's still well known in parts of the country. Now, it was Samhain Eve at the time of this story. Samhain is Samhain Eve is a time when the boundary, shall we say, between the country of the living and the country of the dead gets a bit porous. It opens up, and the dead spirits can walk among us. It's a time when people like to be comfortable and safe at home, not out roaming the countryside at night. For who knows who you might run into. It's a time when strange things happen. Hanrahan, the head schoolmaster, a tall, strong, red-haired young man, came into the barn where some of the men of the village were sitting on Samhain Eve. It had been a dwelling house, and when the man that owned it had built a better one, he had put the two rooms together and kept it for a place to store one thing or another. There was a fire on the old hearth, and there were dip candles stuck into bottles, and there was a black quart bottle upon some boards that had been put across two barrels to make a table. Most of the men were sitting beside the fire, and one of them was singing a long, wandering song about a Munster man and a Connacht man that were quarrelling about their two provinces. Hanrahan went to the man of the house and said, "I got your message." But when he'd said that, he stopped, for an old mountainy man that had a shirt and trousers of unbleached flannel, and that was sitting by himself near the door, was looking at him and moving an old pack of cards about in his hands and muttering. "Don't mind him," said the man of the house. "He's only some stranger, came in a while ago, and we bade him welcome, it being Samhain Eve. But I think he's not in his right wits. Listen to him now, and you'll hear what he's saying." Well, they listened then, and they could hear the old man muttering to himself as he turned the cards. Spades and diamonds, courage and power, clubs and hearts, knowledge and pleasure. "That's the kind of talk he's been getting on with for the last hour," said the man of the house. And Hanrahan turned his eyes from the old man as if he did not like to be looking at him. "I got your message," he said again. "It's my cousin over there that is wanting to see you," said the man of the house. And he called over a young frieze-coated man who was listening to the song and said, "This is Red Hanrahan. You have the message for him." It's a kind message indeed," said the young man, "for it comes from your sweetheart, Mary Lavelle." "How would you get a message from her? And what do you know of her?" "Well, I don't know her, indeed, but I was in Loughrea yesterday, and a neighbour of hers that had some dealings with me was saying that she bade him send you word, if he met anyone from this side of the market, that her mother has died from her, and if you have a mind yet to join with herself, she is willing to keep her word to you." "I will go to her indeed," said Hanrahan. "And she bade you make no delay, for she has not a man in the house. And if there is not a man in the house before the month is out, it's likely the little bit of land will be given to another." Well, when Hanrahan heard that, he rose up from the bench he had sat down on, and he said, "I'll make no delay indeed," he said. "There's a full moon, and if I get as far as Gilcrease tonight, I will reach her before the setting of the sun tomorrow." Well, when the others heard that, they began to laugh at him for being in such a haste to get to his sweetheart, and one asked him if he would leave the school in the old lime kiln where he was giving the children such a good education. But he said the children would be glad enough in the morning to find the place empty and no one to keep them at their task. And as for the school, well, he could set it up again anywhere, as he had his little inkpot hanging from his neck by a chain, and his big Virgil and his primer in the skirt of his coat. And some of them asked him to drink a glass before he went, and the young man caught hold of his coat and said that he must not leave them without singing the song he had made in praise of Venus and of Mary Lavelle. Well, he drank a glass of whisky, but he said he would not stop, but would set out on his journey. "There's time enough, Red Hanrahan," said the man of the house. "It'll be time enough for you to give up sport when you're after your marriage. And it might be a long time before we see you again." "I will not stop," said Hanrahan. "My mind would be on the roads all the time, bringing me to the woman that sent for me, and she lonesome and watching till I come." Some of the others came about him, pressing him, that had been such a pleasant comrade, so full of songs and every kind of trick and fun, not to leave them till the night would be over. But he refused them all, shook them off, and went to the door. But as he put his foot over the threshold, the strange old man stood up and put his hand, that was thin and withered like a bird's claw, on Hanrahan's hand, and said, "It is not Hanrahan, the learned man and the great song-maker, that would go out from a gathering like this on a Samhain night. And stop here, now," he said, "and play a hand with me. And here's an old pack of cards that has done its work many a night before this, and old as it is, there has been much of the riches of the world lost and won over it." Well, one of the young men said, "It isn't much of the riches of the world that has stopped with you, old man." And he looked at the old man's bare feet, and they all laughed. But Hanrahan didn't laugh, and he sat down very quietly, without a word. Then one of them said, "So you'll stop with us after all, Hanrahan?" And the old man said, "He will stop indeed. Did you not hear me asking him?" And they all looked at the old man then, as if wondering where he came from. "It's far I have come," he said. "Through France I have come, and through Spain, and by Loch Grain of the Hidden Mouth, and none has refused me anything." And then he was silent, and nobody liked to question him. And they began to play. There were 6 men at the boards, playing, and the others were looking on behind. They played 2 or 3 games for nothing, and then the old man took a fourpenny bit worn very thin and smooth out from his pocket, and he called to the rest to put something on the game. And they all put down something on the boards, and little as it was, it looked much from the way it was shoved from one to another, first one man winning and then his neighbour. And then sometimes the luck would go against a man and he would have nothing left. Then one or other would lend him something, and he'd pay it again out of his winnings. For neither good nor bad luck stayed with anyone. And once Hanrahan said, as a man would say in a dream, "It's time for me to be going the road." But just then a good card came to him, and he played it out, and all the money began to come to him. And once he thought of Mary Lavelle, and he sighed, and that time his luck went from him, and he forgot her again. But at last all the luck went to the old man, and it stayed with him, and all they had flowed into him, and he began to laugh his little laugh to himself, and to sing over and over to himself, "Spades and diamonds, courage and power," and so on, as if it was a verse of a song. And anyone looking at the men and seeing the way their bodies were rocking to and fro, and the way they kept their eyes on the old man's hands, would think they had drink taken, or that the whole store they had in the world was put on the cards. But that was not so, for the quart bottle had not been disturbed since the game began, and was nearly full yet. And all that was on the game was a few sixpenny bits and shillings and maybe a handful of coppers. "You're good men to win and good men to lose," said the old man. "You have play in your hearts." He began then to shuffle the cards and to mix them very quick and fast, till at last they could not see them to be cards at all, but you would think him to be making rings of fire in the air, as little lads would make them with whirling a lighted stick. And after that, it seemed to them that all the room was dark, and they could see nothing but his hands and the cards. And all in a minute a hare made a leap out from between his hands, and whether it was one of the cards that took that shape, or whether it was made out of nothing in the palms of his hands, nobody knew. But there it was, running on the floor of the barn, as quick as any hare that ever lived. Some looked at the hare, but more kept their eyes on the old man. And while they were looking at him, a hound made a leap out from between his hands, the same way as the hare. And after that, another hound, and another, till there was a whole pack of them following the hare around and around the barn. The players were all standing up now with their backs to the boards, shrinking back from the hounds, and nearly deafened with the noise of their yelping. But as quick as the hounds were, they could not overtake the hare. Till at last it seemed as if a blast of wind burst open the barn door, and the hare doubled and made a leap over the boards where the men had been playing, and went out of the door and away into the night. And the hounds, over the boards and through the door after it. Then the old man called out, "Follow the hounds, follow the hounds, and it's a great hunt you will see tonight." And he went out after them. But used as the men were to going hunting after hares, and ready as they were for any sport, they were in dread to go out into the night. And it was only Hanrahan that rose up, and that said, I will follow on." "You'd best stop here, Hanrahan," the young man that was nearest to him said, "for you might be going into some great danger." But Hanrahan said, "I will see fair play. I will see fair play." And he went stumbling out of the door like a man in a dream, and the door shut after him as he went. He thought he saw the old man in front of him, but it was only his own shadow that the full moon cast on the road before him. But he could hear the hounds crying after the hare over the wide green fields of Grana, and he followed them very fast, for there was nothing to stop him. And after a while he came to smaller fields that had little walls of loose stones around them, and he threw down the stones as he crossed them and did not wait to put them back up. Well, he passed by the place where the river goes underground at Ballylee, and he could hear the hounds going up before him towards the head of the river. Soon he found it harder to run, for it was uphill he was going. And clouds came over the moon, and it was hard for him to see his way. And once he left the path to take a shortcut, but his foot slipped into a bog hole, and he had to come back to it. And how long it was he was going he did not know, and where he went. But at last he was up on the bare mountain, with nothing but the rough heather about him. and he could neither hear the hounds now, nor any other thing. But the cry began to come to him again, at first far off, and then very near, and when it came quite close to him, it went up of a sudden, up into the air, and there was the sound of hunting over his head, and then it went away northward till he could hear nothing more at all. "That's not fair," he said, "that's not fair." And he could walk no longer, but sat down on the heather where he was, in the heart of Slieve for all the strength had gone from him, with the dint of the long journey he had made. After a while, he took notice that there was a door close to him, and a light coming from it. And he wondered that, being so close to him, he hadn't seen it before. And he rose up, and tired as he was, he went in at the door, and although it was night time outside, it was daylight he found within. And presently he met with an old man that had been gathering summer thyme and yellow flag flowers. And it seemed to him as if all the sweet smells of the summer were with them. And the old man said, "It's a long time you've been coming to us, Hanrahan, of the learned man and the great songmaker." And with that, he brought him into a very big, shining house. And every grand thing that Hanrahan had ever heard of, and every colour he'd ever seen, were in it. There was a high place at the end of the house, and on it there was sitting in a high chair a woman the most beautiful the world ever saw, having a long, pale face and flowers about it. But she had the tired look of one that had been long waiting. And there was sitting on the step below her chair 4 grey old women, and the one of them was holding a great cauldron in her lap, and another a great stone upon her knees, and heavy as it was, it seemed light to her. And another of them had a very long spear that was made of pointed wood. And the last of them had a sword that was without a scabbard. Red Hanrahan stood looking at them for a long Hanrahan time, but none of them spoke any word to him or looked at him at all. And he had it in his mind to ask who that woman in the chair was that was like a queen, and what she was waiting for. But ready as he was with his tongue, and afraid of no person, he was in dread now to speak to so beautiful a woman, and in so grand a place. Then he thought to ask what were the 4 things the 4 grey old women were holding like great treasures. But he couldn't think of the right words to bring out. Then the first of the old women rose up, holding the cauldron between her 2 hands, and she said, "Pleasure." And Hanrahan said no word. Then the second old woman rose up with a stone in her hands, and she said, "Power." And the third old woman rose up with a spear in her hand, and she said, "Courage." And the last of the old women rose up, having the sword in her hands, and she said, "Knowledge." And everyone, after she had spoken, waited as if for Hanrahan to question her, but he said nothing at all. And then the 4 old women went out the door, bringing their 4 treasures with them. And as they went out of the door, one of them said, "He has no wish for us." And another said, "He's weak, he's weak." And another said, "He's afraid." And the last said, "His wits are gone from him." And then they all said, "Haughty, the daughter of the Silver Hand, must stay in her sleep. It is a pity. It's a great pity." And then the woman that was like a queen gave a very sad sigh. And it seemed to Hanrahan as if the sigh had the sound in it of hidden streams. And if the place he was in had been 10 times grander and more shining than it was, he could not have hindered sleep from coming on him. And he staggered like a drunken man and lay down there and then. Well, when Hanrahan woke, the sun was shining on his face, but there was white frost on the grass around him, and there was ice on the edge of the stream he was lying by that goes running through Dercow and Drumnarod. He knew by the shape of the hills and by the shining of Loch Grain in the distance that he was upon one of the hills of Slieve Aughty. But he was not sure how he came there, for all that had happened in the barn had gone from him, and all of his journey, all but the soreness of his feet and the stiffness in his bones. Well, now, it was a year after that, and men in the village of Kepatago, sitting by the fire in a house on the roadside, had read Hanrahan, that was now very thin and worn, and his hair very long and wild, came to the hall door and asked leave to come in and rest himself. And they bid him welcome because it was Samhain night. He sat down with them, they gave him a glass of whisky out of a quart bottle, and they saw the little ink pot hanging about his neck, and they knew he was a scholar. And they asked for stories about the Greeks. Well, he took his Virgil out of his big pocket of his coat, but the cover was very black and swollen with the wet, and the page, when he opened it, was very yellow. But that was of no great matter, for he looked at it like a man that had never learned to read. Some young man that was there began to laugh at him then, and to ask why did he carry such a big book with him when he was not able to read it. It vexed Hanrahan to hear that, and he put the Virgil back in his pocket and asked if they had a pack of cards among them, for cards were better than books. When they brought out the cards, he took them and began to shuffle them. And while he was shuffling, something seemed to come into his mind, and he put his hand to his face like someone who was trying to remember, and he said, "Was I ever here before? Or where was I on a night like this?" And then of a sudden he stood up and let the cards fall to the floor, and he said, "Who was it brought me a message from Mary Lavelle?" "We never saw you before now, and we never heard of Mary Lavelle," said the man of the house. "And who is she anyway?" he said. "And what is it you're talking about?" "Well, it was this night a year ago. I was in a barn, and there were men playing cards, and there was money on the table, and they were pushing it from one to another, here and there, and I got a message. And I was going out the door to look for my sweetheart that wanted me, Mary Lavelle. And then Hanrahan called out very loud, 'Where have I been since then? Where was I for the whole year?' "Well, it's very hard to say where you might have been in that time," said the oldest of the men, "or what part of the world you might have travelled. And it's like enough you have the dust of many roads on your feet, for there are many go wandering and forgetting like that," he said. "And once they've been given the touch." "Ah, that is true," said another of the men. "I knew a woman went wandering like that through the length of 7 years. And she came back after, and she told her friends she had often been glad enough to eat the food that was put into the pig's trough. And it's best for you to go to the priest now," he said, "and let him take off you whatever may have been put upon you." "It's to my sweetheart that I'll go, to Mary Lavelle," said Hanrahan. "It is too long I've been delayed. How do I know what might have happened to her in the length of a year?" He was going out the door then, but they all told him it was best for him to stop the night and to get the strength for the journey. And indeed, he wanted that, for he was very weak. And when they gave him food, he ate it like a man that had never seen food before. And one of them said, "He's eating as if he is trodden on the hungry grass." It was in the white light of the morning then that he set out, and the time seemed long to him till he could get to Mary Lavelle's house. But when he came to it, he found the door broken and the thatch dropping from the roof, and no living person to be seen. And when he asked the neighbours what had happened to her, all they could say was that she'd been put out of the house, she had married some labouring man, and they'd gone looking for work to London or Liverpool or some big place. And whether she found a worse place or a better place, he never knew. But anyway, he never met with her or with news of her ever again. And that is the story of Red Hanrahan on Samhain Eve, the night that strange things happened to him and he lost his mind for a whole year. And he never got to see his girlfriend, his Mary Lavelle, where she had left in that year. She certainly couldn't wait a year for him. Now later, I'll tell you another story of Red Hanrahan. I'll tell you all 6 of them. But for now, I'm going to have a bite to eat and a little drop of the crater. You might like to join me.